name is Father Jim Keenan. I'm the Gaston Chair here at Boston College, and once every year I host an event. Last year we invited Bishop Kevin Dowling from Rustenburg, South Africa, to speak on HIV/AIDS in South Africa. And this evening's gathering comes about through to a dinner conversation with my community. I live in Roberts House on Beacon, right across from the School of Education in McGinn Hall. And we had invited Father Joseph Schuster from Frankfurt, who's here for 4 months doing some sabbatical work, to dinner at my Jesuit community. And for some reason, we got on the question of stem cells. It may have been Father Hollenbach or Father Plock bringing up a question, but somehow we got onto the question of stem cells. And I asked Joseph what was his position, and he said, well, my position is the same as all German moral theologians in Germany. And this is one of those lines like we have always taught, that is like we all always hold. And so we talked about it for a little while. We realized that the position that he held was different from other people's position. So I called up my friend Hilla Haka over at HDS, who is also been trained in Tübingen, and I'll be introducing all these people in a moment. And she's here at Harvard Divinity School. And I said, Hilla, is your position like Joseph's? And she said, well, what's Joseph? I said, well, I think this is Joseph's position. She said, no, I have a different position. So I said, oh, that's good. And then I turned to Lisa Cahill, and I turned to Tom Shannon, and I said, how about if we have a conversation? So that's what this evening is about. I've invited each of these presenters to speak for just 10 minutes about what would happen if they could set the stem cell agenda. That's what I'm interested in. That question, because everybody wants to bring something else to the discussion. But each has their own set of priorities, and I'd like those priorities to come forward. So each person has been invited to just speak for 10 minutes. The order is going to be that Dr. Tom Shannon will be first, and he will be followed by Dr. Hilla Haka, and then by Father Joseph Schuster, and finally by Lisa Cahill. After the four have spoken for about 10 minutes apiece, then we will gather here, all four of them, and I will moderate a discussion either among them or with you or both. But we'll just see how it goes. But as I say, I think each brings a different perspective to this important discussion. Let me introduce these four wonderful people and good friends. The first, Dr. Thomas Shannon, is Professor of Religion and Social Ethics in the Department of Humanities and Arts at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. He is the author and editor of several books in social ethics and in bioethics. He is the co-author of the New Genetic Medicine, Theological and Ethical Reflections, and he is the editor of a 4-volume series with Sheed and Ward in bioethics. The first volume on reproductive technologies, death and dying, healthcare policy, and finally, genetics, ethical, policy, and social issues. The second speaker will be Hilla Haka. Hilla Haka is Associate Professor of Christian Ethics at Harvard University. She's been there since 2003. She studied Catholic theology, German literature, and philosophy at the universities of Tübingen, Munich, and Nijmegen. From 1989 on, she has been a staff member for the Center of Ethics in the Sciences and Humanities in Tübingen. From 1992 to 2002, she was lecturer at the Department of Ethics and Social Ethics at the Catholic Theological Faculty at Tübingen. In 2003, she was the Heisenberg Scholar of the German Science Foundation. Since 2005, she holds the Chair of Moral Theology and Social Ethics at the Catholic Faculty of Frankfurt University. And she's on leave from there until this summer, when she leaves us. Her main works are in several fields of ethics, above all in theory of ethics, in ethics and literature and bioethics. In bioethics, she has worked on methodological questions of bioethics, such as narrative bioethics, reproductive medicine, and genetic diagnosis, and is currently working on a new approach to a feminist ethics, a gender ethics in the sciences. Her books include Moralische Identität, Moral Identity, and Ethic of Early Diagnosis in Genetics, and she has 2 co-edited volumes in English, Ethics of the Human Genome Analysis, European Perspectives, and the Ethics of Genetics in Human Procreation. Joseph Schuster Joseph Schuster received his doctorate from Tübingen in 1982. In 1987, he began teaching moral theology at St. Georgen in Frankfurt. In 1998, until September 2004, he was the rector of the Jesuit College at St. Georgen in Frankfurt. He has written his, he wrote an article on the authority of the church on moral questions in a collection of essays that his doctoral dissertation director Alphonse Auer edited. He's written about moral possibilities, he's written on death, he's written on suffering, and he's written on virtue. He has about 14 articles in different German theological encyclopedias, like the Lexikon der Bioethik, where he's written about end-of-life issues and on death. Finally, Lisa Cahill of Boston College is the J. Donald Monin Professor at Boston College, where she has taught since 1976. She's the only one of these 4 people who taught me. She is the past president of the Catholic Theological Society of America, and she is also the past president of the Society of Christian Ethics. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has held office in the American Academy of Religion, and served as editor or on editorial boards of more than a dozen journals. Her most Lisa Cahill's areas of special interest are fundamental bioethical issues, fundamental theological ethics, use of scripture in ethics, ethics of sex and gender, bioethics, just war theory and pacifism, and the history of Christian ethics. A current research focus of hers is genetics and social ethics, including cloning, stem cell research, and international development and marketing of genomics-based tests and therapies. Her most recent book is Bioethics and the Common Good, being published by Marquette University, just been published by Marquette University Press. And she's writing a book called Bioethics, Theology, and Society, that's being published by Georgetown in a series that I edit. And she's also editing a collection of essays called Genetics, Theology, Ethics, and an Interdisciplinary Conversation. So these are our 4 very capable speakers, and each of them will speak for roughly 10 minutes, answering the question if I could set the stem cell agenda. So I invite Tom Shannon to the podium.
Obviously, no basketball game tonight.
It's at 9 o'clock. We're ending at
9 o'clock due to spring, though some people in the room are very interested in that. Let me briefly say 2 things. One, in principle, I think, yes, there is a case that can be made to remove stem cells from embryos and use them in research. Second, I would say, not so fast. And I want to simply identify 4 reasons why I think not so fast. And if I stay closely to my text, I'll stay within my 10-minute frame. First, the promise. One of the characteristics of genetic research in the United States is basically gene hype. We assume that genetics is going to solve all problems and take care of any difficulties we have in the healthcare area. And unfortunately, if that's true, it may be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decades away. Things are going very slowly in genetics right now. If you want to see some of the gene hype, read the Commonweal from January 14th, Daniel Callahan, The Myth of Stem Cell Research, where he lays out extremely explicitly some of the claims of geneticists and why, in fact, it's going to be a long time before they're dealt with. Second, this is an article just published 31 January in Nature Medicine. And my colleague in biology at WPI has not thoroughly debriefed me on this, but the problem is all of the stem cell lines that have been approved for use in the United States have been grown on mouse and bovine platforms. and what they're finding out is there is some kind of acid or something that gets taken up into the stem cells, and if they're implanted into a human, are going to cause essentially a rejection of the cells. The technical problems are really a major thing that we need to think about as we evaluate the promise of stem cell research. And I think the promises are far in advance of the science. Second, commitment to stem cell research is a commitment to business as usual in modern medicine. That is, it's a commitment to high-tech rescue medicine. The focus is on curing, not preventing. And buried in this are three assumptions that are very important. The first is, if we continue with high-tech rescue medicine, we'll seek cures and turn away from discovering any social and or environmental causes of disease. So we'll look at not the context, but at a gene. Second, we'll commit ourselves to a healthcare policy that says health is improved by commitment to cures, not necessarily dealing with the causes of disease. Finally, the position will suggest that health and disease are individual problems, specifically problems of your genes, and have nothing to do with the environment or the social context. That's very important, because if there's anything we are learning at the present time, the environment is a very important causal factor in disease. So committing to genetics, gene therapy, stem cell research commits us to business as usual with a variety of assumptions about disease that relatively completely ignore the environmental dimension. Third, who's going to benefit from stem cell research? The assumption is everybody. Of course, that's how medicine happens. Everybody eventually benefits. But the problem is eventually. And how far the eventual is, we don't know. In the meantime, though, there are two people who will benefit from stem cell research if, in fact, it is successful. A, those who have insurance and whose insurance will cover experimental procedures. And that's getting to be a crapshoot because insurance companies are less willing to subsidize medical research. The second is people who can afford to pay it out of pocket. And since a lot of the investment is coming not only from the government, but from venture capital, capitalists like returns on investment. These are going to be expensive therapies. So my sense is that as stem cell therapy progresses, essentially the ones benefiting are the very wealthy. Finally, the research is going to be extremely expensive and extremely labor intensive. Now, Callahan argues in this article, I think it's a very interesting article. Thus far, and it's somewhat contradictory to what I just said about the cost. Thus far, stem cell research has not proven very effective. Gene therapy is stagnant right now because of problems with it. The move is to government to fund it, because government has a little deeper pocket. You notice in what's going on now is a very interesting stem cell race. California is committing $30 million, huge pile of money. New Jersey is getting into it. They want their cut of the pie. What's going to happen is state governments, federal government, is going to be asked for more and more money. The question is, when you have more money from one place, it comes out someplace else. Venture capital is somewhat slowing down because the dividends have not been coming in that rapidly. So one of the questions we have to think about is, in terms of public policy, who's going to pay? Is it going to be the tax dollar? if it's the tax dollar, should there not be some kind of reduction in the cost of therapies as a way of passing back to consumers the money they paid in? So what I think is happening in general in the stem cell research, and one of the reasons why I think we really need to be cautious is we've overpromised. The science is really just beginning, and we have a huge number of cost factors to think about, as well as what kind of healthcare policies do we want. It seems to me there's a good argument to be made for prevention and trying to work things through first on that level, then think later down the line maybe about more curative rescue interventions. So I'll stop there, move through, and see where other people want to wind up.
Thank you.
If I could set the stem cell agenda, it would actually look a bit different than today. I would look at first, or I would like first to set the framework for the ethical assessment in here. 5 aspects I have particularly in my mind, and I want to address them here, hoping we can come back to them in the discussion. First, the priorities of global healthcare and healthcare in industrialized countries. Second, the blurring of basic and applied research and its connection to regulation issues. Third, the blurring of reproductive techniques and regenerative medicine. Fourth, the role of gender, class, and race. And fifth, the role of theology within bioethics. And guess what? I will try to stick to my 10 minutes. Global healthcare will be very short here. The health divide has been a problem for many decades, but biotechnology and biomedicine does not seem to be committed to the overcoming of the gap if only 1% of the public and private research funds go into diseases mostly non-Western countries are concerned with. Furthermore, the health divide within industrialized countries, linked as much to the issues of class, race, and gender as to genetic heredity, has not sufficiently come under scrutiny by bioethics. I think at Boston College here are quite familiar with this thought. Second, the relation of basic research, applied research, and clinical application. I will concentrate a bit more on this. Embryonic stem cell research will allow researchers to gain more knowledge about the human development in general, but also about diseases threatening especially the developed world. Cancer, heart disease, diabetes, Parkinson's disease, or Alzheimer's disease. Funds for basic research are generally divided between public agencies and private research centers. The underlying moral assumption and norm of public funding of basic research is that research is a value of its own right. Science for the sake of knowledge. Basic research is subject to legislation and the assessment of public research agencies which decide on the value of certain fields of research under the condition of concurrent fields of research and B, scarce resources. Basic biomedical research adds to this another assumption, moral in a narrower sense, namely to serve the well-being of individuals and populations, and to promote their health or to protect them against diseases, even if this goal may only remotely relate to specific projects, and that is okay. There's no question that embryonic stem cell research is basic research and should not be burdened with immediate expectations or prognoses. The assessment of applied research is not identical with that of basic research, since here research is not considered as a value of its own right. Thus, concurrent approaches to solve a specific health problem, the short-term and long-term consequences and prognoses, as well as the patient's perspectives, are much more important in applied clinical research than in basic research. In our context, embryonic stem cell research is assessed in congruence with adult stem cell research and more traditional methods of treatment. Seen against this backdrop, the promises of embryonic stem cell research are rather vague and by no means more realistic than the promises and prospects of adult stem cell research. However, in the public and political debate, this assessment has developed into a clash of moral values, and arguments are often used in suggestive ways. For example, the media attention to celebrities like Christopher Reeve or Nancy Reagan, or the comparison of embryo research to genocide. The blurring, third point, the blurring of reproduction and research in regenerative medicine. As is well known, assisted reproduction often has the side effect of spare embryos. These can be used for research, but will have the disadvantage of not exactly matching with the patient if applied research and clinical research is considered here. Among many ethical concerns about costs of potential therapies, the donation or commodification of human embryos, pressure on IVF clients, or potential lack of procedural control of private reproductive clinics with respect to consensual decisions have been raised. But I will mention here my concern about the conflation of family planning via assisted reproduction with stem cell research. Parenthood and research are two social practices of very different kinds. The scarcity of what is called reproductive resources and the legalization of surrogate motherhood have commercialized assisted reproduction already. But embryo stem cell research, a need for embryos or egg donors, compensated with $5,000 to $30,000 US, will increase this tendency. To consider embryos as mere material reduces them to the property of their owners, the parent. This is counterintuitive and inconsistent, given that prospective parents consider at least some of these embryos as their future children. Parenthood, however, cannot be conceptualized as a relation of property owner and property, and neither as relationship based on a contract. Parenthood is an asymmetrical relationship involving unconditional recognition, responsibility for a dependent human being, and the obligation to respect the other in his or her own rights. If embryos are considered to be future children over against the present material of research, the tension between the two conceptions becomes evident. It is this tension that must be assessed against the backdrop of the new research possibilities. In order to protect both social practices and their underlying values, reproduction and research should therefore be as much separated as possible. This means no use of spare embryos for embryonic stem cell research. Would cloning then be a solution to the problem of conflation of reproduction and research? In some ways it would actually. But new problems arise with respect to cloning. Evidently, the cloning of human beings, which has been called reproductive cloning, is in conflict with the Nuremberg Code, written in 1947, calling on the right of the research subject. The Nuremberg Code constrains, together with many other arguments, the Nuremberg Code prohibits the production or reproduction of humans via cloning. However, is that also the case with so-called non-reproductive cloning? The trouble here is who is a research subject in embryonic stem cell research if no reference to a future child, as in reproductive medicine, can be made, because implantation is not at all intended? Is a human being's health and well-being concerned if we speak of an embryo potentially not even created via fertilization? Is our language precise enough yet? Or do we start another rhetoric maneuver in order to legitimize a practice some of us desperately want? The embryo's moral status is not identical with any kind of tissue, but neither is it identical with the moral status of fetuses or born human beings. It is necessary to acknowledge that reality does not follow the rules of black or white distinctions. And therefore, the early development of human embryos is and will remain a borderline case or a twilight zone for moral reasoning and should be considered as such. It is for this reason an indisputable universal solution cannot and will not be found. Fourth point, the role of gender, class, and race. For the time being, embryonic stem cell research is dependent on either the donation of embryos or the donation of egg cells. So non-reproductive cloning is depending on the donation of egg cells only, whereas the spare embryos in reproductive medicine are donated for the derival of stem cells from actual embryos. This donation must be questioned if it is compensated, as I said, with $5,000 to $30,000 at least for the egg cells. If donors believe, I cite Donna Dickinson, they are demonstrating altruism, but biotechnology firms and researchers use the discourse of commodity and profit. We have not incomplete commodification, as some people hold, but complete commodification with a plausibly human face, and Donna Dickinson calls it exploitation. The question is where the line between donation and commodification can be drawn. And I would put it this way: how far do we want to go in the commodification of the human, particularly of the woman's body? Another example envisions the application of stem cell research in clinical treatment, which might be unlikely but not impossible. Whereas in reproductive medicine, the origins and genetic makeups of the donors are of central importance for the future parents, be a college student, be white, be intelligent, whatever you like, just go to the internet and look what is being offered there. This genetic makeup is not necessary in case of the research context. Hence, questions of egg donation as source of income will have to be discussed as well as the question of race or ethnicity. This will even more become an issue if we put the stem cell research back into the context of the health divide now. Could it be that those who suffer the most will not be able to benefit as much from stem cell treatments, if at all possible, as those who can afford the cost-intensive procedure? Will the question of racism haunt us once stem cell banks are being developed with the help of women? Because genetic diversity is not an issue of economic planning and the makeup of stem cell banks. Last point, the role of theology. The role of theology, particularly Catholic theology, cannot be restricted to questions of human anthropology and the moral status of the embryo. Rather, questions of justice in the service of healthcare, in the distribution of medicine and treatment, and medical research must be assessed with respect to the acuteness of the problems, the participation of all people and peoples concerned, and the shift of the Western agenda. Theological ethics will look at the relation between research and healthcare, at the relation between the language of gift and donation on one hand side, and economic utilization and commodification of the human body on the other hand. And it will have to look at the gender, class, and race exploitation that is possible within the framework of embryonic stem cell research. Theological ethics will be critical, prophetic, and constructive in providing its own practical structure and network of community services. Furthermore, theological ethics will have to work on concepts of parenthood, kinship, and reproduction in the age of reproductive medicine and stem cell research, and work on hermeneutical ethical models of these social practices rather than base its moral reasoning on an anthropology that is not sufficient as normative basis any longer. So far for now.
Thank you.
So at first I have to apologize for my language, for my English. Secondly, I will thank my brother Ron Decelli for helping me, bringing my German English into American English. So, though I have a quite different view on this problem. The ethical assessment of research with embryonic stem cells depends on the clarification of the question, what is a proper moral status of the human embryo? I will suppose, I see all the problems named, but I will suppose in my statement that the research goals are noble. Some research about human dignity. Thus, human being is different from all other living beings by his ability to be and to act morally. He alone is able to act with purpose. He alone can coordinate these purposes with others. As a being with nature having moral capacity, human being is person, that means an end in himself. Man can abuse his liberty, though he can degenerate in such a way as no other living being can ever degenerate. He can sink to a bestial level of which no animal would ever be capable. But human being, nevertheless, doesn't lose his dignity. This dignity always remains. Also, human being can lose the opportunity to represent this dignity. It is among the aims of human rights to prevent this. The idea of the human dignity doesn't allow any graduations. There are no more or less, but only one is a norm, or who the opposite does claim, mixes up dignity with merit. If one founds the right of life on human dignity, there cannot be restricted or a gradual protection of this life. The proposition that this dignity befits human being from nature must not be understood naturalistically. A man's dignity is ascribed to him not arbitrarily, simply he is a human being. It, in this respect, is always an object of recognition and not of bestowal. Can the dignity befitting a human being be connected with actual abilities? With which type is human dignity connected by abilities? Here is named in the literature as candidates: self-consciousness, ability for self-respect, self-determination, consciousness of the identity of one's own, ability to suffering, the ability to have interests and wishes. Actual wishes and interests cannot justify any norm taken for itself. This is a naturalistic fallacy. They rather require assessment. All the wishes and one's own interest authorize nobody to intrude in the right of others. The normative idea of human dignity can't correspond to observation or some descriptive concept, but only the normative idea of the moral capability. The relevant factor that it is a nature determined essentially by moral ability. The dignity of human being is founded on this: what he ought to do and what he ought to be. Moral capability belongs to the class of dispositional concepts. It isn't a matter of empirical concepts, but rather theoretical, which are not immediately the object of empirical observation. But still, they can provide the requisites under which empirical facts can be explained. That's a difference. Now follows a longer quotation. Such dispositions can be seen as potencies that enable the one possessing them to effect something or to be affected by something, but not themselves reach concrete actualization. As a dispositional potency, this human moral capacity is not just some actual concrete quality waiting around in the wings, as it were. Moreover, it is not some accidental quality that attaches or not to human beings. It is rather a characteristic essential to our very being, one that endures the full extent of our existence, even when, for whatever reason, we fail to perceive what morality demands or fail to act in accord with it. And with such essential normative properties, so here, no either have this moral capacity or no one does not. Gradation, such as almost, a bit, but not quite enough, or too much, is simply out of question. Up till now, I have not answered the question whether it would be right to ascribe human dignity and thus also the moral ability to the embryo. If dignity and moral ability are not empirical concepts, they don't not have any empirical stages. We are not talking here about empirical decisions, but about insight. The fact that human worth is not something one can simply decree into existence or non-existence follows simply from the recognition that by reason of the moral capacity essential to human existence, it cannot be some transient disposition, but must instead be a disposition that persists from the very beginning of one's life as an individual and in all phases of that life, which includes one's existence as an embryo. If stipulative or conventional definitions decide on human dignity and human rights, then the whole quarrel about the question of the moral status of the embryo indeed isn't worthwhile. The talk about all human rights is then robbed of its meaning. In connection with this, the species argument is in this respect of importance because it is members of this species Homo sapiens of whom the disposition for moral ability is characteristic. The human embryo belongs to that species, and therefore the extension of the concepts person and humankind is the same. All beings of the species Homo sapiens are persons. That is the reason why research which kills human embryos cannot be morally allowed. Positions which claim that the person becomes into being with the completion of implantation have to explain how it could be possible that with implantation a non-person becomes a person. Who or what causes that something becomes a somebody? Two final remarks. Firstly, the question whether an entity is an embryo or not cannot be decided on the basis of qualities which only externally befit this entity, such as her whereabouts in vitro or in utero, or the intention of her production for research, for example. Secondly, this means that only intrinsic features of the respective entity can have a critical relevance. In this regard, specific kind and developmental potential are particularly meaningful. It is undoubtedly valid to distinguish between the object of recognition and the reason for recognition. Reason for recognition is the moral ability of human being. The criterion for this ability is the developmental potential intrinsic to that entity in the sense of real totipotency. Thank you for your patience.
I find the whole area of stem cell research to be much more gray, I guess, than Father Schuster, and also, therefore, perplexing. And it's difficult for me to say exactly how I would set the stem cell agenda. But I think that there are three basic issues that I would want to keep in play. So I'm going to name those and then make a proposal. If I were able to establish policy or to suggest a policy, what would it look like? And my proposal will also have three aspects. As you'll see when we get to that, they represent a compromise among the first three issues or values. So the three basic issues that I think we're dealing with, and these are also questions of value, are these. I'll just say them quickly and then I'll go back and expand a little bit. The first one is the value of the embryo. The second is the value of the research. And the third is the value of justice in healthcare access. So I'm going back to some of the issues that Hilla Hawker and Tom Shannon already talked about. But first of all, on the question of the value of the embryo, we know that this is a very contentious topic in our society. I don't have a final solution or analysis to offer. So one thing that I'm looking for here is some common ground. How can we build some consensus in our society about the status of the embryo? From my own perspective, I do think that the embryo is I'm not as certain as Father Schuster that therefore from the beginning it has the same status as what I would call a human person. I think the discussion around that is very complicated, also very interesting and very important. But if we're going to talk, first of all, about building social consensus, I think maybe we would be able to get some agreement simply on the fact that at least an embryo is the beginning of a human life at some stage, at an early stage. In fact, there have been several high-level commissions and professional organizations, such as the President's Council for Bioethics, the National Bioethics Advisory Commission, and the Ethics Committee of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, that have all said, and these are very pluralistic groups, if you take all of them together, they've all said that the embryo deserves special respect. And if it does, then it seems to me that there have to be some limits on how it's treated. I don't believe that it would be consistent to create embryos for the purpose of research if we believe that the embryo is a very early form of human life, whether or not it's a person, and that it deserves special respect. Okay, so second note, let me move on. I'm not going to draw a conclusion from that right yet. But the second value that I wanted to put on the table is the value of research. As the other speakers have already indicated, there's certainly a value in basic research on embryos and on genetics. But applied research is not likely to bear fruit in the immediate future, or in anything like the immediate future. So as Tom Shannon said before, the benefits of stem cell research have been overhyped and overpromised. That was a good word. And so I think we need to step back from that, even granting the value of basic research as Hilla Hocker was observing. The third value that I want to put on the table, well, so now we have the value of the embryo and the value of research, and so we're already perceiving that there's a need to balance these. Now, into the picture comes a much bigger framework, and although this has been very important among the speakers tonight, it's not always very important in the social and cultural discussion of stem cell research in our country. And that is the value of healthcare and the value of justice in access and of distribution of healthcare benefits and goods. We all know, I think, that there are 45 million uninsured people in this country, and the number is growing. As others have pointed out, it's not very likely that the benefits of stem cell research, when they are developed, will go to those people without insurance. In fact, I think it's very legitimate to ask whether that should be a spending priority, even if we all had access to insurance, because preventive measures and treatments for common destructive or fatal diseases are at least equally important, if not more so. I also want to note, as others have done, that the impetus behind stem cell research is very much profits. Profits that will accrue to those who invest in the research and who have patent rights. So the products of stem cell research will be marketed to those who have insurance or who have the money to buy them. In the past year, a couple of years, there have been several books and articles in the newspapers outlining, or even exposés, I'd say, of the implication of scientific research with corporate profit, making investments. Marcia Angell, who's a former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, very well respected, has a book out just this last year called The Truth About Drug Companies, How They Deceive Us and What to Do About It. You can tell she's trying to stir up some controversy there. But she points out that, I think it was in 2002, anyway, a few years ago, in the Fortune 500 companies, the top 10 drug companies made more money altogether than the other 490 companies on the list. So there are huge profits to be made through pharmaceuticals. The results of stem cell research will no doubt be marketed in this way, and other means are going to be neglected. Angell, in the same book, also says that drug companies are very, very quick to throw over less profitable types of research in order to pursue the money-making varieties. And an example she gives is the shortages of flu vaccines that we had this last year. She says one reason that there's a shortage of that and other childhood vaccines is that the drug companies don't find it as profitable to do the research, development, and production of those vaccines as some other things. So stem cell research will be pursued if it's profitable. And if it is being pursued with a great deal of fanfare and publicity, my cynical side rises and I bring a real hermeneutic of suspicion to the rationale behind it. Is it really to relieve the suffering of humanity? No, it's to relieve the suffering of a few people with health insurance or a lot of money. And there will be big profits. If there aren't big profits, then the products won't be developed in the first place. There's also another book that came out a couple of years ago by an author named Sheldon Krinsky, and it's called Science in the Private Interest. And I mention this because he does a number on universities and research universities and their science departments, and shows how, in fact, university researchers and their institutions are paid to conduct trials. They're promised a cut in the profits via patent and royalty agreements, and yet often they're denied information about the overall outcome of the trials that are being conducted and that they're helping to conduct. So again, it's not just the companies, it's also some of the academic researchers that, I'm not naming any specifics or individuals here, but Harvard University, for instance, just established a center for stem cell research. So again, is it pure pursuit of knowledge, or is there profit motive that is involved even in academic research when it is turned to an end like stem cell research? So the conclusion that I draw from this is that I'm skeptical about whether stem cell research is capable of being of great benefit to humanity, and if it is, to whom will those benefits eventually go? So I then have 3 items on a proposal. And these represent a compromise. I don't think I could defend all of these with absolute logical consistency as a good Kantian would do. But maybe I'm an American pragmatist, so we trying to develop policy and in trying to bring more people on board, make our fellow citizens aware of the issues, this is what I would propose. First of all, there should be one law about stem cell research that applies both to private and public research. And I don't know if you've picked up from the discussion so far that in this country, you've heard about President Bush limiting research to 12 lines or something that existed before he made this decree a couple of years ago. But those restrictions only apply to research that's going to get federal money. If you have a biotech company, you can do whatever you want. You can make embryos from donated or purchased eggs, you can destroy them, you can recombine them with animal DNA, you can do whatever you want. There's no laws on it whatsoever. Okay, so I think we need one law that applies to public and private research. Secondly, I think that law should prohibit the creation of embryos for research. I am not as clearly opposed to the use of leftover IVF embryos. Not that I think there should be great numbers of embryos left over from IVF. We should outlaw that too. But right now, there are hundreds of thousands of embryos frozen in storage. And most of those will be destroyed anyway. So for me, a compromise position that does not amount to an unacceptable disrespect for the embryo because they are going to be destroyed in any event might be to use some of those embryos for embryo research. And I also think that would gain a bigger hearing within the American public. The final thing, this is a brilliant stroke, I think, and I actually heard this from George Amos at Boston University. I heard him on NPR. And he said, outlaw patenting of information that comes from embryo research. And if the patents disappeared, the profits disappeared, we would soon find out how many people are really interested in basic knowledge or serving humanity through the alleviation of disease equally to everyone. So those would be my 3 proposals, and the 3 aspects of my proposal. A common law, no creation of embryos, and no patents on embryo research. And finally, I would like to reaffirm what Hilla said about theology. I think theology, and especially Catholic theology, is too often limited to defending the value of the embryo, which is an important thing to do. but our tradition much more centrally, I mean Christian theology, and I think other religious traditions as well, really holds up the value of inclusion, of the preferential option for the poor, of transparency, honesty, and solidarity in the common good. And I don't think those values are being preserved or promoted by stem cell research as it exists today. I could go into the stem cell thing in California, but Hilla did that a little bit of it, or who did that, Tom? I don't know. So we'll leave that to the discussion. Thank you.
I know there's a few people who may want to leave. We will finish just before 9 o'clock, just so you know that there is an end point. I think what we'll do. I think what we'll do is, 2 years ago, Tom and I were invited by a foundation to California, and 10 Catholic ethicists were invited to speak about stem cell research. And they just paid us for 2 days to talk about it. And they brought in Protestant, mostly Protestant ethicists who were sitting around the room watching us. It was like a fishbowl, but the Protestant ethicists were really kind of cool on it because they could not get over the fact that the Catholics all had a certain language, like the language that Lisa was referring to at the end there, that there's a certain tradition that's been ongoing, that has been concerned about human nature, it's been concerned about justice, it's been concerned about the option for the poor, solidarity, inclusivity, and we had this discussion for two and a half days. It was very nice. It was in Southern California, and we were completely paid to just talk. This evening, nobody's being paid, but we're just going to keep talking. But what we would like to do is to invite you to raise your questions to any one of the speakers, because what I think, my interest in holding this session this evening is to increase the quality of the discussion on stem cell research. And I think that each of the 4 presenters have done that. They've managed to, from their own perspective, their own traditions in the Catholic theological ethics, to explore their own positions of what they would consider to be particular values that need to be protected in rather defined ways. So I open the floor. I'm just going to moderate, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. And you could also say to whom you would like your question to be.
Just for anybody, how do you see this related to the issue of adult stem cell research? Is that more profitable now, or is that a better way to go, or does it look like it might yield the same or better results or not as good results?
I think it's unclear. My understanding of the science is that it's difficult to find adult stem cells. It's more difficult to manipulate them to grow into different directions. So my sense is that some people are moving in that direction, but that it's technically more complicated. Assumedly, the embryonic stem cells are easier to manipulate and tease into directions because they're at a different, obviously a different stage of development. I think it's a technical issue more than anything else.
Hilla wants to answer, Joseph as well.
It depends on whom you ask. If you ask the embryonic researchers, they will say, adult stem cell research are only brought up by a critical public and by Catholics. Because they don't like the embryonic research, but actually we tell you, especially with respect to neurologically based diseases like Parkinson's disease and so on, they won't do the job. On the other hand, if you look into medical journals, you will see almost every month that something is going on in adult stem cell research which they didn't believe was possible. So the potential of adult research is much bigger, apparently, than we would have thought last year. And then there's one additional point to be made, I think. there is already application of adult stem cell therapies. You have that in leukemia. Leukemia is it? Cancer therapies and all different kinds of diseases. It is used for years now. So it is not just the promise of, in the long run, possible application with a different source, but it is a rather simple source, maybe with a limited scope, although other researchers say the limited scope is actually better because you can direct the cells better and so on. So I would even say it is a threefold question: embryonic stem cell research, adult stem cell research, and then traditional applications of treatments. For example, in Alzheimer or Parkinson, this is much more important than even adult stem cell research promises. But they are not applied. Why? They have no health insurance, the communication between the physician and the neurologist does not work, they have to commute and they don't do it often enough, the patients I mean, yeah? There's no rehabilitation, boom, 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 and you climb up and down the ladder of poverty and deficient health care services. So it's threefold.
Joseph?
Only in addition, the most research in Germany is done on adult stem cells, you know. There are some therapies, but the researchers told me, a panel like this in Germany, they told me, but we do not exactly know what really happens, and for that we have to do research with embryonic stem cells. So they told me that, so I'm not a biologist, I'm not a medicine, so I have to believe that. So that is the reason. And they told me, after that we know that, then we can only do, so they hope, a research with adult stem cells, because we know what happens now, and then we can produce specific tissue, you know. That is not organs. That's a science fiction. You know, every serious researcher will say to you that is science fiction, but tissue, that you can produce with stem cells. That is possible.
Lisa, do you want to say?
No, it's been covered.
Megan?
I have a question. In all the discussion of stem cells, you hear about embryonic, and it's usually concerning the controversy of what to do with IVF, the creation of embryos for the stem cell research. Why do you think there's no focus on other ways to get embryonic stem cells, specifically umbilical cords? And the fact that they have stem cells and that that's a non-controversial way we could get them. I mean, in my opinion, it's probably, I think, has a lot to do with what Hilla and Lisa were saying, that it, in terms of money, the cost to house
That
and
is the reason.
do research on umbilical cords is more than it is to create and take these other cells. But why do you think that that doesn't make it into the national debate? That there is.
I don't know if it's as effective.
Yeah, they're not really
umbilical-
potent.
Yeah, they don't
They're
have.
not really
Yeah, I don't think I think, I have seen literature on it, you know, to some extent, but I'm not an expert. But my impression is, you know, I stand to be corrected, that research generally is not regarded as promising as the adult or the embryonic stem cell. But maybe there's also the cost issue.
That's, so, I can say only what I have read, excuse me. Though they say that is too expensive to get. So that it must be very expensive, and the amount is only little. So that they told me. So, you know, that, but it is expensive. So that. So
To retrieve
To
stem
retrieve-
cells from the umbilical
Yeah,
cord.
yeah. So that is.
I think there are also other biological matters here, because I would say umbilical cord stem cells are in between adult and embryonic biologically, but embryonic stem cells are supposed to be No, kept forever and ever. So you can, once you have a stem cell line, you can use it forever and ever. And this is not the case with adult stem cells, and it is not the case with umbilical cord derived stem cells, yeah? So, I think it is not only the financial, aspect of how to get it, yeah? Because they are working on it, they are creating the, stem cell lines from, umbilical cord, donations too, yeah? So it is not that they are talking of, alternatives altogether, they want to do everything. And then, of course, the question of totipotency in the embryonic stem cell research becomes a big issue. Yeah. And I mean, Lisa, you said there are hundreds of thousands of spare embryos in the United States, which is true, which was published and so on, and there they are. This is the image we get. It's actually not true. They are out there, but
They're not,
people say they are
Right.
as contaminated
Yeah.
as the stem cell lines. I read this new article that the stem cell lines are useless if they would be envisioned for application, but the same is true for the spare embryos. Once they are used for research, people say the 400,000 spare embryos in the United States alone will drop to 4,000. This is what I read, yeah, so that is an estimation, of course, because no one knows exactly, but, you know, sometimes this is used too as an argument, and, on the
Of course,
other hand, in
another-
Britain, for example, there's a big issue about the spare embryos and,
But what-
conflict of interests within ICF. You only get a specific treatment if you sign a contract that you will donate your spare embryos
Yes.
and so on.
I mean, that's another issue too with the IVF embryos, however many of them there are. It's not just open season on them, they belong to people, you know, so they would have to be released. But the fact is a lot of them are going to be destroyed. Now, whether
Yeah.
they would be useful or not is another issue, as you're saying.
There's a number of other issues that I think you're missing, and that is when you consider the basic research that needs to be done with stem cells, and say, I can only do this with a particular stem cell line. That's not true, because as the first speaker pointed out, when the cells are grown with animal culture techniques, they lose their ability to where you want to take those stem cells. So the concept of being able to take basic research from the umbilical cord cells teaches us how to put the right chemical signals in to cause the cells to differentiate to the line that we want to go. And I think a lot of the emphasis that you've been talking about has been directed towards the creation of embryos, right? And then some entity that might evolve to be human. That's not the total direction that stem cell research should be going. It should be going to tissue therapy, as you pointed out, right? All right. Also, when you consider the whole concept of system biology, tissues eventually, when you know how to do this properly, although you and I would disagree on this, I think that you actually can develop organs from that. Now, that organ may not be totally in glassware. It may have to be in an in vitro type of environment. And the concept is that you could even use your own stem cells, right, if we know how to signal properly. And taking that to the next level, I'm sorry, it's a long comment, I apologize for this, but taking it to the next level is that the concept of cancer is not an unbounded growth of cancer cells themselves. It's the concept that they send signals and bring in stem cells that can be for the vascularization of more blood flow into that region. And it's actually those stem cells that have become immortal, all right, that become the cancerous cells ultimately. They are differentiated to cancer cells. So there's an awful lot of research that can be done in glassware with umbilical cord cells that we can learn, right? And we lose a lot of that knowledge when we say we can only stay with these primary lines, but these primary lines are being contaminated anyway.
I think that's part of the hype of this thing, that to cure certain diseases that are associated with celebrity spokespersons or spokesmodels, you have to go this way, and then there's a price associated with that, and, you know, it just spins out of control.
Yes.
This is addressed to everybody. If there were to be a market, I guess, on stem cells or stem cell cures, why would it be bad that only the people who could afford it get cures from it? I mean, that is a percentage of the population that's better than nobody. I mean, it's not like if there was a market for it, it wouldn't be like the situation with organs now. There's no market, it's illegal, and there's lines waiting for organs. Organ donors, there's lines. I don't know how that works. But
Well, first, there's a huge market in organs, huge market.
But I think
You
his
know,
question is a
but-
basic one. What, you know, you could think of HIV, AIDS,
Yeah.
retrovirals are available for those who can pay for it. And that we presume to be at least some sort of a good. That it's not for all people is a real problem. And he's asking, I think, a central question. Philip?
But I would question the setup of the question already, because as I said, questions of research funds are always made in a choice between different options. So it is not just to ask the question, why would it be bad to help at least a few over against no one? But it is to ask the question, why is it right to invest into a promise or a distant potential to cure few, and in the meantime, not doing anything to cure others where it might be easier, where it might be more promising, and where the potential is already seen. So that, I would say, is to state or raise the question adequately. It is not that we're living in this reduced world of bioethics or biomedicine or biotechnology as they want to make us believe it, but we're living in a far more complex world of science and funding and research funds.
Lisa?
But I think you do raise a legitimate point, which is, does everyone have to have access to the same amount of health care without allowing anyone to access more health care? And in this country, I mean, where I was coming from, I guess, is that in this country, we do not have a basic minimum provided to everyone. In countries where there is a basic minimum provided, there usually is also a mechanism or practice whereby more wealthy people can access greater levels of discretionary health care, if you like to put it that way. And so I think you do make a good point that unless we want completely socialized medicine, or could forget whether we want it, you know, could we even accomplish it with a ceiling on what people can access, then what's wrong with having stem cell therapies as one of these alternatives that some people with the money could get? And I think that's a valid point. I think where I would come back on that is to say that in general, I think it's a really valid point, but I also feel that stem cell research right now in this country is an object of a lot of hype. And it is starting to attract additional public funds. Like in these states, they're using state funds. Like California is going to give, I think, $300 million a year to stem cell research, whereas the federal government's only giving $25 million a year. And that's going to be taken from someplace else in the state budget, probably, or at least some of it is. So it's starting to make the disparities in healthcare resources worse, you know, on false pretenses, I feel. So.
There's also the case that which diseases are you going to start looking at? And the reality is, most of the diseases will be single gene diseases because those are going to be the easiest ones. Now, if you happen to have one, you know, you want that taken care of. But on the other hand, it's a relatively small percentage of the population who have particular single gene diseases. So it's not so much a question of why shouldn't people be able to buy what they want. It's the system is skewed in what it produces because of the ease of the research to do it. And you know, so you can take, for example, heart disease. A lot of that is environmental and lifestyle. You know, you can do all the gene therapy you want, it's not going to solve somebody who, you know, overeats, overdrinks, and oversmokes and having a heart attack. So it's, part of the problem of your question is, which diseases do we sort of lock into and why, and then what's the social consequence of that?
Yes, Joseph.
But I have a problem. You were discussing always over problems that I see too, but they're different in the States, I think, and in my country, so we do not have the same problem. So with distribution of medical aid, so we have an insurance that all people have access to that. So, okay. So you were discussing the old principle. So I would say, ab usus non tollit usum. So you are discussing always slippery slopes arguments, you know, and that I have a problem. So you, from my respect, you're discussing the second question before the first is resolved. So I will say, that's perhaps an example that is not good, but okay, I will write. There is a hunter, he has a family, and they are hungry, really, they are hungry. And he goes out to look for some deer. And he sees some, but he is not certain if it is a really deer or could it be a man? he thinks, oh, my family, my children are really so hungry, so I need something to eat. And then you shoot. So you have to answer the first question. And if you are, Lisa, if you are uncertain, so if you say that human life is the most fundamental value, so then you have to protect this value. And if you are uncertain, that also you have to protect this value because this is the most fundamental value that we have. So, and then I can understand, though, to argument for embryonic stem cell research because that always means killing embryos. So that is my problem. I see all the other problems too. So I would not disagree with you with all the other, but that is for me, and that was the reason why I put it on this topic, that is the reason why I said you have to answer the first question.
But
otherwise you are shooting, you know.
That's what we have, though, isn't it? I mean, the question is, if I could set the stem cell agenda, and that's precisely what you're doing. You're suggesting what the stem cell agenda should be. Point 1 first, and then point 2. But the others are also trying to establish how do you set the agenda. That's the whole point of this discussion. So that's why we're having the discussion. It may be American pragmatism that tries to go to consensus. I'm astonished that you said that. Or it could be a Kantian claim about the human being. But
First of all, I have to say, I used to think exactly like that. And I don't think like that anymore. And I think that, you know, on the one hand, you very rightly are calling attention to a concern for intrinsic values and not to compromise what we see as a value because it might be expedient. That's where I hear you coming from, which I think is a very good moral concern and caveat to that. But I've also seen that there is an unending debate over the status of embryos. And in the meantime, we don't have any policy then that prohibits their destruction. So in this country anyway, it's a very polarized debate with people unable to achieve a consensus. And therefore, there is more creation and destruction of embryos than there would be if we could achieve a consensus that at least some minimum boundaries needed to be observed. And so, and I think I've become less Kantian and more Aristotelian, maybe. And so I use practical reason and look at, wise men or wise people as models and try to define the mean between the extremes.
Hilla wants to respond as well.
May I confess, I'm a Kantian. I still don't think that you have to become an American pragmatist to have some doubts about the moral status, even with a Kantian argument. And I even doubt that this is a Kantian argument, to be honest. Yeah? It is a scholastic argument. It is an argument based on the nature of humanity. But I was kind of getting a bit nervous here because I want to complicate our matters a bit.
Please.
I said, I just put it down on the table again, I don't want to use spare embryos from reproductive medicine and in vitro fertilization, not because of the moral status issue as such, as a philosophical thing, but rather because of the social construction of parenthood, reproduction, and trying to get a kind of a consensus there too, but they are at least potentially being considered by these couples as future children. So they don't know when they are creating the embryos, which of them will be actually implanted. So all of them should be considered to be future children, not as such, not in their entity, maybe too, but yeah. But I'm rather trying another argument, and I do not see that this argument can also apply to non-reproductive cloning, because I don't have the purpose to implant this embryo anyway. I don't even fertilize an egg with a sperm. Is that to be called reproduction? If I have an egg, pull out the nucleus of the egg, put in an adult nucleus of my skin perhaps, or a blood cell or so, and then go on with the reproduction, and we all have seen that it is potentially possible to create Dolly the sheep, and it will be sometime it will be Jim the baby, and we know that this will be possible. Yeah, but it will be possible. But still, is that, I'm not saying that it is not theoretically possible to see that, but is that really to be called a human embryo? I would say the way as we know it, and then the question, is that really to be included in this moral capacity, human being, dignity concept? I have my doubts, and I'm torn. I don't say yes, I don't say no, but I tend to say no, it is not reproduction as we know it. It is not a human embryo as we know it. It is not a future child, and I want, since you're here, I would like to have your answer.
Oh, but they have questions.
Quick question for the gentleman on the end. I do see embryos as future children, and therefore something that I have trouble reconciling is, in America, since we have all of these stem cell lines available and whatnot, we're not going to use them, even though I see them as future children, they're end up being destroyed anyway. So as someone from a perspective outside where you have different policies in your country, how do you reconcile those two facts, that even though perhaps you would advocate protection of embryos and want to avoid doing research on them, however you know that they will eventually be destroyed? The question has come up in our newspapers and things like that before. It's just hard for me personally to
We don't have
give any
embryos. We don't have spare embryos.
Well,
In Germany, but she means
Here.
here, like
Here.
Texas.
I see.
so how would a German look at what goes on in this country?
It's bad.
Yeah.
I have problems with that. I have problems.
Yeah.
I think it can be reconciled actually, because on the one hand side, of course, you should, not you America, but we all should try to create as few embryos as possible. Yeah. Now, as I said before, most of these 400,000 embryos we have here will never ever become children under the best conditions, because they are actually not viable anymore. So, and what is really the problem in this conflict area, which is problematic in itself in many respects, yeah? But what is exactly the problem of just destroying these embryos and not promoting another form of commercialization and commodification? What is exactly the problem? Because we know that a lot of fetuses or embryos die in the normal process of reproduction. Some of us don't even discover this, but there are miscarriages, and we are sad for them and so on. Some of them we don't even notice. And I'm not trying, I don't want to make this argument, this is then a good reason that there is no status or so. Yeah? I don't mean it that way, but if that is a conflict area anyway, why not just be, I don't know, satisfied or sad, but in the end satisfied to let them die?
One last question.
You're not satisfied with that answer?
No, I have to be certain.
No, I would agree with you. Not destroy, but let them die. There is a difference, and not use them, you know. Let them die. It's, you know, it's a frozen status, you
Let's
know,
just say-
in eternity.
Okay,
It makes no sense.
one last question.
Yes, well, I would just say, if, to address the question of what to do with the 400,000 extra embryos in the U.S., if you were to continue the Schuster's analogy of the huntsman, which I very much enjoyed, by the way, it would be a lot like if the huntsman were to, continuing the research would be like to keep shooting at these deer, which might be people, or and if that's the case, and if that's the case, well then, if you still can't tell, if it's the case that you shoot a bunch of these things and you don't know what to do with them because you don't know if they're deer or people, then to use the embryos that we have now would be much like eating, the carcass or something, if it's eating a human, obviously, you don't want to be doing that, and it's something that's different from killing someone, but it's still not, it seems to promote the act of killing someone, if you're going to eat their flesh, you seem to say, well, it's okay for me to just kill this person, so I can eat them.
Man is an analogy going
Should not rest my
All right,
All right.
I want to make the first point that there is a substantive moral difference between killing and murder. Okay, that's an important distinction. So it seems to me, I could make an argument that destroying the very early embryo to obtain stem cells is clearly and obviously, beyond all doubt, an act of killing. That's what happens. The critical moral question is that murder? For murder to occur, there has to be a moral subject. And to me, that is, I think the answer to that is no at that stage. You have a process of development, so I don't think it's either or. Evolution, if evolution has taught us anything, it's process. So it's not sharp line, process. Second, one has to think about, what is necessary but not perhaps sufficient for a moral subject. And so you have to begin thinking of a whole variety of things that may be necessary but not sufficient, and it seems to me individuality is one of those things that's necessary but not sufficient. And there's a very strong philosophical and biological argument that the very early embryo is not yet individualized, so it's not a moral subject yet, so it is killing, which has to be justified. You say, okay, it's not a person, therefore you can do anything you want. That doesn't follow. And it's what Lisa was getting at with respect is owed. How does one couch that? So but that distinction is a very important one.
This evening, we've heard Tom Shannon speak to us about the need to pay attention also to the social and environmental sources of disease and the issues of treatment of people who are suffering. Hilahaka giving us questions about blurring of basic and applied research and the blurring of reproductive and research issues and the role of gender, race, and class. We've heard Joseph Schuster talk to us about the basic issue, the moral status of the embryo that needs to be solved before we move to subsequent issues. And then we've heard the proposal of Lisa Cahill And we all have our points of agreement and disagreement here. We have questions about the value of the embryo research and of justice in research, but also three strong, clear proposals. That there be a common law for the status of the use of embryos for public and private research, that the law should prohibit cloning, and that there should be a law forbidding or outlawing patenting of the information that's accrued from embryonic research. This has been an evening in which, in the past 90 minutes, we have covered a wide variety of topics associated with it. It was made possible by 4 people of deep commitment to the issue and of good competency, a competency that I think here at BC we welcome well.